I'm Cody Daigle-Oriens, and welcome to StoryFest 2020. Due to the ongoing impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, StoryFest 2020 is going virtual. From September 15th through September 29th, StoryFest will premiere 13 live and pre-recorded author events, featuring top authors and creators in genre fiction, comics, young adult fiction, and middle grade fiction. This year, we have over 50 authors joining us from all across the country, and in cross-genre panels, they will explore the big ideas at the heart of telling stories in today's world. Even though we can't welcome you to the library's forum in person, we're glad to have you with us virtually. Thanks for being here, and enjoy StoryFest 2020. Our moderator, Ellen Datlow, has been editing science fiction, fantasy, and horror short fiction for 4 decades. She was fiction editor of Omni Magazine and Sci Fiction, and currently acquires short stories and novellas for Tor.com. She has edited many anthologies for adults, young adults, and children, including the Best Horror of the Year series, Echoes, the saga anthology of ghost stories, and Final Cuts, New Tales of Hollywood Horror and Other Spectacles. She has won multiple Locus, Hugo, Stoker, International Horror Guild, Shirley Jackson, and World Fantasy Awards, plus the 2012 Il Posto Nero Black Spot Award for Excellence as Best Foreign Editor. Datlow was named recipient of the 2007 Carl Edward Wagner Award, given at the British Fantasy Convention for outstanding contribution to the genre, and was honored with the Life Achievement Award given by the Horror Writers Association, in acknowledgement of superior achievement over an entire career, and honored with the World Fantasy Life Achievement Award at the 2014 World Fantasy Convention. Laird Baron spent his early years in Alaska. He is the author of several books, including The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All, Swift to Chase, and Worse Angels. His work has also appeared in many magazines and anthologies. Christopher Golden is the New York Times best-selling Bram Stoker Award-winning author of Ararat, Snowblind, The Pandora Room, and many other novels. With Mike Mignola, he co-created the comic book series Baltimore and Joe Golem, A Cult Detective. As an editor, his anthologies include Hex Life, Dark Cities, and The New Dead, among others. Stephen Graham Jones has been an NEA Fellowship recipient, has won the Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters, the Independent Publishers Award for Multicultural Fiction, a Bram Stoker Award, and 4 This Is Horror Awards, and has been a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award and the World Fantasy Award. John Langan is the author of 2 novels and 4 collections of stories, the most recent of which is Children of the Fang and Other Genealogies. His work has received the Bram Stoker Award, the This Is Horror Award, and the Russian Masters of Horror Award. He is one of the founders of the Shirley Jackson Awards, for which he currently serves as vice president. Josh Malerman is a New York Times best-selling author and one of the 2 singer-songwriters for the rock band The High Strung. His debut novel Bird Box is the inspiration for the hit Netflix film of the same name. His other novels include Unbury Carol, Inspection, and Mallory, a sequel to Bird Box. A.C. Wise is the author of 2 collections of short fiction published with Lethe Press and the novella Catfish Lullaby. Her short fiction has appeared in Uncanny Magazine, Shimmer, and the Best Horror of the Year Volume 10, among other places. Her work has won the Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic, and has been a finalist for the Sunburst Award and the Lambda Literary Award.
Hi, everyone. So anyway, the first question I'd like to ask you, and I'll call you out about this. What influenced you to write about the aspect of movies or movie making that you did for Final Cuts? And Chris, you can start.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I have sort of 2 answers to that. The first is that this particular story, this is actually the 3rd story that I've done that surrounds the esoteric movie memorabilia collection of a guy named Masarsky. And the first one is one that Pete Crowther did when I was a guest at British fantasy a number of years ago called The Hiss of Escaping Air. And that story came out of an experience I had in Los Angeles with a sort of very famous old school Hollywood producer who, if I told you the story, and I won't bore you with it right now, you'd all laugh and think I was making it up, but with just the level of buffoonery was through the roof. And his level of sort of self-regard was just nothing I'd ever encountered before. And it just prompted me to start thinking about this idea of somebody who sort of collects weird esoteric movie memorabilia. And I thought, oh, he has a tooth that was knocked out of Robert De Niro's mouth while filming Raging Bull. And that led to that story, The Hiss of Escaping Air. And then it led to another story. And so this was sort of, when you asked about this anthology, immediately I was like, I've got to do another story set in this world and from this guy's collection. Mm-hmm. And so I had to think about what else would be in that collection. And I thought I hadn't done anything having to do with sort of monster masks or anything like that. And so I loved the idea of a mask that would transport you back not only to the set of the movie, but to the set during something horrible.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Josh, you want to go next? What inspired you?
Yeah.
And mention your movie too. I saw the movie of it, although I have to say I like the story better than the book.
All right, cool. That's good. I guess for me, it's like I find it strange that I, of all people, have, how would I say this, like a shimmering object in my life with Bird Box between the movie and the book, right? Because I'm a real lo-fi dude. Like, I wrote like something like 14 novels before Bird Box came out. And back then I just assumed that rough drafts were like, you were done. I was like, what did I know? Like, I thought a rewrite meant that you had to spell check it. And like, I didn't know how any of this works. I'm just like, all right, I finished another one. And in my band, I'm the dude who's always like, yeah, we got it, let's roll. And then the boys would be like, no, you gotta re-sing that. Or Derek was too fast, or this kind of thing. So when you brought up this, I have like an Ed Wood streak in me, and I wanted a lo-fi. The first thing that came to mind was a lo-fi maverick, a lunatic, an endearing, delusional lunatic who will make a movie with whatever is available. And in this case, he makes a movie starring his dead parents as the cast. A Ben Evans film is, it's him positioning his dead folks around the house, outside the house, dressing them up as different characters, voicing them. Oh, and most importantly, editing all in camera. You know, when the tape's done, we're done. I mean, the movie's done when the tape's done, right? And so I really relate to Ben because of that just lo-fi, like, dude, it's a movie. We're done. Like, you've seen a million movies, you've read a million books, some that everyone loves, and you think that some are terrible, some are great. But Ben Evans figures his movie will fit somewhere on that spectrum. And I feel the same way about all my books and songs. So it was a no-brainer for me to immediately go to a lo-fi lunatic.
Okay. And yeah, he is a lunatic. Stephen, you have another maybe lunatic people in your story.
Yeah.
More than one.
You know, my story comes from going to the movies all the time. And one day when I was at the movies at a matinee, I looked a few rows down from me. It was a fairly empty screening. And someone had gotten one of those assisted listening devices that you put into your cup holder, and, it kind of reads out the text for you. And I kind of got to watching that more than I was watching the movie, I guess. And came home and found out that on YouTube, you can find all of that description. It's descriptive text. It's not actually what they're saying. It's descriptive text of what's going on in the movie. It's for visually impaired people. And it is so cool to watch scenes from movies with that text coming up, or it was for me, but I realized that there was some space in between there for an intrusion, for some uncertainty, for some distrust.
How accurate are those? The captions?
Man, you can close your eyes and go with them really well. But then again, I know the movies, so maybe I don't know. I think it's all right. But you can choose between the descriptive text or the actual audio of the film. And it's they're really great devices. I'm glad that theaters provide them. And the other place this story comes from is I'm in 8th grade, I guess. We're living in Wimberley, Texas, outside Austin. my dad he hangs ceiling tile. That's what he does until late every day. And one day he comes home and we're out. My mom had made some sort of, you know, chicken and corn and potatoes or whatever for us, and we're eating it. And I say, wait. And I hold the corn up just right under the light, and it's all glistening. And we're like, what's up with that? And so we pick at it with a fork or something. It turns out the corn is full of metal shavings. And then my mom gets to investigate, and sure enough, our can opener was throwing metal into the vegetables, you know, and it'd been doing that
happening?
It'd probably been going on for a long time. But what I remember so distinctly is my mom said, no, y'all can't eat this. And my dad, he kind of looked at her and looked at us, and then he pulled the bowl to himself and he ate the rest of it, you know, because he was hungry.
Well, I've been eating it for 20 years. Why not?
Yeah.
John Langan.
Mine came out of two places. I guess the first off was my long friendship with Paul Tremblay. And I realized
horribly in this show.
Well, here's the thing.
Your former
my former friend Paul Tremblay. Here's the thing. I realized that over the last several years, I had written a number of stories in which Laird Baron was a character, and they just sort of happened, you know, every now and again for some reason or another. And I kind of had this moment where I felt sort of bad. I felt like I had failed Paul as a friend because I hadn't included him in a story. And so that was maybe the first thing. And then the second thing was that several years ago, Laird and I went to visit Paul, and we stayed with him he and his family for I guess like probably a weekend. And during that weekend, Paul took us to Salem, and we went into this fantastic little, I guess, wax museum, you would say, called Count Orlok's Nightmare Gallery. And it looked very cheesy from the outside. But once we went in, it was this total labor of love, and it had all this wonderful monster memorabilia that was all just I'm sure they're not wax, but that's how I think of them, you know, wax sculptures of monsters ranging from the very beginnings of film to much more recently. And one of the featured attractions was a reproduction of the Dracula ring, which was this ring that had actually appeared in a number of Dracula movies and has become, for a long time, it was this particular ring, this particular design was really, it was obligatory for anyone playing Count Dracula to have it. I think even in the most recent BBC Dracula, he wears a ring. It's not the same ring, but so right away, Laird said, I'm going to use this in a story. And I felt like, oh man, Laird got to it first. But then after a little bit of time, I thought, well, you know, he wrote that story a little while ago, and I think I could maybe do something with it. So those two things came together to Paul's detriment.
Right.
Man,
Yeah.
John, I don't know how you and Paul are able to do that, to put like real people into stories. Like if I did that with you and something happened to you, I would feel so bad. You know, I'd feel like it was because of the story, which I know gives more importance to my fiction than it's really due. But nevertheless, I'm way too superstitious to even consider that. It terrifies me.
Well, do you know the funny
Even that's why John's doing it.
Well,
yeah.
I had
He's hoping.
I had no problems with what happened to Paul, but what happened to his family, I felt horrible about. And I actually had to say to Paul while I was getting towards the end of the story, listen, man, some pretty bad things happened to Lisa and Emma. As you know, and if you want me to take that out, that's, you know, no problem, because I feel kind of weird about it. And Paul said, no, that's fine. So perhaps they need to have a conversation with him.
Maybe they don't know. Allison?
It sort of came from a couple different places. One thing, I'm just a sucker for kind of found footage stories. And I got really excited about the idea of sort of a serial killer, you know, making these little movies out of the people that he was killing. And I went and I wrote the story, and then I went back to your original directions and saw you'd said, please don't do found footage stories. I've read so many of those. But I talked you into taking it anyways, which was very kind of you. So thank you very much.
I was just afraid I would get all found footage. You know,
I'm apparently very bad at
none of
reading
those. No
directions.
more of those. No.
And I was also kind of interested in, I felt like sound was sort of an underexplored aspect of movies. So I knew I wanted that to be part of the story, that somebody who was, you know, primarily working on sound in films and, you know, how that really sets mood and can make things, you know, much scarier than they might be otherwise, just visually, and can really, you know, draw out the emotion in a scene. And then the last part of it was, I was just looking for some kind of story that I could put cicadas into, because they're such fascinating insects, and thinking about it in retrospect, there's such a cyclical nature to a lot of horror of the, you know, the bad thing that keeps happening, or the thing that happened to these kids when they were young, and then they have to go back and confront the horror again as adults. And it seemed like it was actually a pretty natural fit to have, you know, cicadas that have this long lifespan, a lot of it where they're, you know, in this liminal space between life and death underground, and just sort of tying, you know, the cycle of horrible things happening to the cycle of the cicadas coming back, was something that I wanted to explore and thought was kind of a neat horror thing.
Laird?
A couple of things. One, obviously, we were writing, you know, I was writing to a theme, or submitting to a theme, and I generally tend, if it's a very defined theme, to try to come up with something that is sort of the opposite of what I would instinctively gravitate toward as a subject. Found footage in this case, or the secret history of a film or an actor, you know, things that I've done in the past. And so I thought, oh, I'll get as far away from it as I can, and I would assume that people reading the first page or two go, how is this about movies? Because it's set in a medieval cabin, and you know, in the wilderness somewhere, and that was part of it. You know, that's pretty much what I always do. I try to go as far away from the obvious as I can, and the second part, probably the much more fundamental part, is not everybody had a happy childhood, and not everybody, you know, we're not all synonymous on being happy with our parents, and some people have lived in fear of their parents, partially because parenting on some level, and this is going to be pretty controversial, but what the hell, it's a big con job. You're not your real parents. Generally aren't the people that their kids think that they are, and then you combine that with acting. I mean, parents are already actors, and then if you have parents who are actors, we're starting to get layers, you know, layer upon layer of deception there, and you know, and so you have a group of kids who are stuck together. You know, their parents are off doing something, and they're isolated in the wilderness, and you know, and then there is a film. It's actually a film that I wrote about a few years ago. I had it in my last collection, actually. And this particular setting is a secondary fantasy world, kind of a fairy tale world, which is sort of the id of our, I kind of conceive it as sort of the id of our own universe. And so it's not that everybody has a double in this universe, but it's similar in theme or spirit to like The Territories by King and Straub, or the Mirror Universe in Star Trek, some kind of, you know, something kind of reaching in that direction. And so that was my big inspiration, is just sort of this paranoid, dark fantasy setting that somehow incorporated moving pictures. And I don't want to give the story away for people who haven't read it, but obviously moving pictures are central to the story, just in a way that I don't think you would expect.
Okay, I'm going to backtrack. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
You know, I have my self-view turned off, so it feels like I'm just raising my hand alone, like I can't see myself. I don't know if it's really going up or not. But I was going to echo what Allison and Laird said, that, well, maybe I should, when Ellen gives me a prompt or a theme, all I think of is the obvious thing. And then like, Ellen will solicit a story, and I'll think, all right, I'm going to write that story. And then like 5 minutes later, Ellen will send an email saying, I don't want these 6 kinds of stories. And those are my only 6 good ideas, you know? Then I have to go like deeper into weird places, which is what she wants, of course. But It's always like, oh, how'd she know what I was going to do? You know?
And I have to go back. I'm going back to what Laird said. This is totally off topic now. But those of you who have children, do you agree with him about the actor thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go.
Yeah, I mean, it goes for parents and it goes for teachers too. I make my students be present, like they get counted, their absences counts against them. And I guess I'm pretending like I myself am good at attending, and I never went to class, you know? And so I feel like such a hypocrite doing that to them, you know? But John.
I'm just thinking that one of your students is watching this right now and is like,
I know.
I think the next time you should just not show up for class, Stephen.
Yeah,
I have.
I don't know who has kids.
I'm gonna kick it over to Chris because he's clearly much more. He's interested in this. I have no idea.
I was listening very attentively to Laird's point, and I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of theater involved in parenting, particularly when it comes to things like, religion and Santa Claus and all of that stuff. At the same time, I don't know. I mean, I've never felt like an actor necessarily, but I think actually that we're all doing this. I mean, we all have our on voice and our off voice, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, true. I mean, I have my convention persona where I don't feel I'm on, and here it's like partly. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's half.
I mean, like I can't just, you know. Allison, do you have any kids?
I don't have kids, but I think, as Christopher said, or I don't know if you prefer Chris or Christopher, but it's a good point. I mean, everybody sort of has different personas that I feel like they deploy at different times in their life. Like I think I'm very different at work than I am with my friends or than I am at conventions. And that's kind of interesting playing with that thought, like the doppelganger idea that Laird was mentioning, and like how people are, you know, different people at every point in their life or with each social group that they're a part of. You act completely differently.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like when I'm at a bowling alley, I'm a completely different dude, you know, I think.
What is it about bowling that brings that up?
Like, don't go bowling with Steven, whatever you do, man.
The only difference is, I mean, it's true. We all, like Billy Joel, I was talking about the other day, we all wear a face, but you're not at a convention every day. You're with your kids every day. The kids don't see you as you are at the convention. They don't see a certain side of you. And obviously different.
Well, sometimes they do, and that, I mean, I'm not a parent, but sometimes they do, and that's an accident, and that freaks them out.
That's right.
When you find something about your parents that you didn't know.
That's why I prefaced it by saying everybody has different experience. Some parents, probably lots of parents, are wonderful. My point just is that, well, there was actually another element to what I was thinking about this whole thing. I'm not at my significant other's whim for whether I eat, you know, where I sleep, do I get to live to see the next day, etc. And let me just tell you, being raised in Alaska in the woods, I became very conscious. It was no different than kids living in the suburbs. It's just that you become more conscious of it when you live in a remote, you know, isolated circumstances with these people who really are strangers.
I don't know, man. I've met your girlfriend. You are at her whim.
That could be.
Live to the next day.
He has a sword, so you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking about though is that what's interesting in all of this, right, is I'm trying to think of the right way to articulate this, but the way that I think a lot of societal or societies or something like that, parenting methodology has to do with playing the role that your parents played. And it's
trying to do the opposite of what.
Well, and that's what I was going to say,
Ellen.
right? Is that like, so I think if you like one thing that happens is that you look at what your parents did and you say, that's what I'm going to do. That's your fallback. And so that role has been kind of scripted already. And you know, obviously you try to modify it a little bit, but then I think the other thing is, to say, no, you know what, when I said I'm not going to raise my kids this way, I really meant it. And I'm going to try really hard not to do that. But I think that, for me anyway, that's where it feels most like you're just kind of making it up as you go along, because you don't, you know, you can look at something that your parents did where you think that was not a particularly good choice, but so it tells you what not to do, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what to do.
How not to do it.
So it is this, there is this aspect of like improvisation, I think. And you know, obviously you have other guideposts or signposts or whatever. You can try to look at other people or whatever, but For me anyway, I feel it still makes the whole thing a bit more contingent.
Right. Okay, now back on topic. Sorry. I'm sorry.
One last. I was gonna say that you're right. I think you're right, John, because I don't eat metal shavings now, and my dad did eat metal shavings. You know. So.
I want to.
Sorry, Josh.
Ellen, because I don't have kids, and it's.
But do you eat metal shavings?
I actually feel like it's part of the reason is because what Laird said, bizarrely enough, and I've never heard someone voice that before, and I really relate to that, where I'm like, I guess I'm just really comfortable or happy in the life I'm leading, and the idea of that changing either naturally or not, or suddenly I have to be a role model or a character or give a performance of a lifetime for a lifetime. I'm like, man, who has room for that? You know, that's what crosses my mind. I understand that once you would have a child, you would, you know, naturally change. So that is the new you. It's not going to be me as I am now. But that is something that stops me, is that sense of like, I will be irrevocably changed from the character that I am now.
That's interesting. I mean, I never wanted kids. As soon as I realized I didn't have to have them, I was so happy. You know? I mean, it
wasn't a requirement.
Right. Well, I mean, I grew up in a generation where you went to college, you got married, and you had kids. And I went to college, though. Feminism was coming in. It was like the early 70s. And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, you mean I don't have to have kids? It's like, oh my, but anyway, this is totally off topic. I'm sorry, it was a great topic, but we've got to get back on. So, all right. The next thing I'm going to ask, okay, as a horror editor, I love reading horror. I don't watch many horror movies. I watch a handful. I mean, I probably have watched, compared to you guys, I probably watched, that much compared to all the horror you have watched. But anyway, so because you do watch horror and write horror, and I'll start with Josh this time because you were last time. How do you feel? How is the role of what role has movie going or seeing played in you're becoming a horror writer, or has it?
Oh my gosh! I mean,
I don't remember who came up with that question, but it's good.
To be a child of the '80s, like really raised. Let me try to think from age 5 to 15. What an informative horror decade, right? The '80s. I think, to be honest with you, I think that that influence is evident in the entire, everyone on this panel, the entire era that's going on right now, where sometimes I feel like rather than a Stephen King situation, there's almost like 60 of us that make up Stephen King this time around or something. And I feel like we all, I remember sitting down with Bird Box and writing it and it felt so cinematic to me. And it was one of the earlier books I wrote. And then I realized, wait, these all feel this way. And I would have discussions with the girl I was dating at the time about that, about how and I felt strange back then because I'm like, wait, this is supposed to be a book. It's not, I don't want to be thinking of movies this whole time. And then she'd be like, no, this is you. You were raised on this and you've watched a gazillion freaking horror movies. But I think that, so couple that cinematic, which we all were raised that way, right? That cinematic experience with also reading beyond horror in terms of reading like the classics, right? Reading Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, Proust, like all this. Together, I feel like our generation is made up like some bizarre combination of that. And I don't want to call it elevated like a lot of people do and a lot of people get upset about. But there is some sense there of this whole group trying to stretch something. And to me, that elasticity of this era comes from the elasticity of the movies from that we were raised with and reading outside the genre naturally. And you can even, Stephen King cites the 50s horror movies he saw that led to him. So, and he sort of starts, he would be the first, or one of the first, whose books were cinematic, were written by a person who was raised on movies. And so
I disagree. What about all the Twilight Zone writers? I mean, they were,
Oh, that's my favorite gang, by the way. I the other night I got drunk and gave away a Charles Beaumont book, and I'm like upset about it. Like there's like a gap, like a tooth missing in my bookshelf, and I'm like, oh shit, that's that book.
Right, because I mean, a lot of their work became Twilight Zone scripts. So I don't know if they were actually influenced by the movies or they influenced the movies.
I guess you're right, but it seems like the horror movie like really gained speed in the 50s and the Twilight Zone. Like that era is where it's sort of, I know there's that obviously the brilliant Universal stuff before, and of course that plays into it. But it seems like it became, by the time we were kids, oh my God, it was everywhere. I mean, every week there was a new video at the video store. What about just a walk through the VHS store alone, and all those covers, how they would all be like face out, and like my mom would be like, you know, looking for the new movie, and I would like sneak into that row, and all these images, they're not just, it wasn't just image, it was characters. And later on, when you sit down to write a novel and you're thinking of monsters, you're thinking of these gazillion VHS covers that you saw growing up. So yeah, I think I know for all of us, the impact, or for most of us, I'll say, the impact's immeasurable and also really fun. I think that it's made for a more elastic era coming from that wide variety of movies as well.
Who wants to go next? Raise your hand. Come on. No one else wants to say anything? Yeah. About that, Stephen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Josh. I think movies have been intrinsic to all of our development, I would think. I mean, not just us here, but the generation, like Josh is saying. You know, I think really for the 20th century, filmic technique has rewritten the way we organize our minds and our memories. We remember things as scenes, you know, and I'll feel sometimes like, oh, I'm having a flashback, you know, or something stupid like that. I really think that we do organize, like, I feel like I organize my mind like that video rental store that Josh is talking about. You know, here's my 6th grade year, here's that 15th birthday party, all that stuff. And sometimes I get it off and I play it, and I can see the tracking lines, and I know that it's not quite like it was. I'm not remembering it like it was, but I remember it like I need to, you know, if that makes sense. Like Lost Highway, right? But as for how film has affected me, I kind of doubt if I write horror. I think I write something, but I don't know if I write horror if I don't get dragged to the theater in the January of 97 and see Scream, you know, because I grew up on horror. But I always figured I was going to write something, but that like catalyzed all of my big ball of impulse into horror, I think, and landed me there forever.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, so I was born in '67, so I'm in a weird middle place with a lot of this stuff. For me, it's been really interesting because so much of what I write comes from the same stew, but it's sort of on the outskirts. It's horror fantasy or horror thriller, or, you know, I always say the horror people are my people, and that's where I feel at home. But I think that it is movies and comics that made me always think about things in such a sort of mishmash of elements. The first big influence on me was Kolchak the Night Stalker, which came out in the mid 70s. And when I was 9 years old, it was being shown at 11 o'clock at night. And my dad would actually wake me up at right before Kolchak was on, let me watch it, and then put me back to sleep because I was so desperate to see it. And so between Kolchak the Night Stalker, Creature Double Feature had everything. Twilight Zone was huge for me, in reruns, obviously.
Oh, I watched the originals.
and comics. And then I think another thing that was a real turning point for me was 11 years old, convincing some guy to buy me and my buddy tickets to see John Carpenter's The Fog, which is still one of my favorite horror movies. And one of the things I love so much about it is that it plays like a great horror novel from that era. You watch that movie and it feels like the books that I was already starting to read. And I love it so much. But the other piece for me, and the reason, and the thing that inspires these stories that I keep writing about this collection, is that over time, I feel like every day I fall in love with movies more. I always loved old movies, but over the last 20 years, every year, I feel like I watch more on Turner Classic Movies, things that I record, and I get more intrigued by the era and the stars and their lives and the stories that are told and the way they told them that we don't do now. And so I'm just fascinated by all of that so much that it all feeds into the same pot, you know, that I'm drawing from, not just with this story or these stories that I've done, but with everything.
Yeah, I realize that there's a lot of nostalgia in several of this, in this bunch of some of the stories in Final Cut, going back to the era of the movie star or the missing movie. You know, yeah, it goes back to that. But anyway, John, do you want?
I think Allison had her hand up before me.
I'm sorry, Allison.
Oh no, it's okay. Yeah. So I think a lot of horror, I think a lot of the imagery is something that I kind of draw from when I'm writing. I find a lot of, story sparks will start with just, a certain image from a horror film that it might, go in a like completely different direction than in the way the movie uses it, but something will just strike me. I want to, do my own take on that, or occasionally it'll even be sort of a case of arguing with a movie like Oculus. It had a lot of interesting ideas in it, and I really didn't like the execution of a lot of the movie. I'm like, I can do something different with this, so I would incorporate pieces from that into, actually, I think a story that ended up in another anthology of yours, Ellen, my story that ended up in Echoes, the girl eating the pieces of the broken plate. I think that was actually originally inspired by Oculus. Back to the theme of people eating horrifying things like metal shards and, broken pieces of ceramic.
Ellen's next anthology.
The horrifying...
I've just finished a reprint anthology called Body Shocks, a body horror anthology. But I said it's all reprint though. Okay, John or Laird, want to take that question? The movie thing, how movies influence your writing.
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah.
I'm in general agreement with everybody. I mean, I think it's very obvious, from reading our work, and just talking to people who don't write or aren't necessarily artists, the influence of cinema. My experience though was kind of weird because of our family situation. So I would go years. We had a little black and white TV, so we saw network television, some channels sometimes, but so I would watch movies in kind of chunks. Like we would go into Civilization for a day, like a weekend or something, and watch 14. We just go down to the get a couple pizzas, and go down to the video place and get a bag of movies and come back and watch them for 28 hours straight. But
heaven, that sounds like heaven.
Sounds amazing.
I remember that's right, and I agree with Fog. Carpenter stuff was a big influence, but I have a kind of a weird relationship with the whole thing, just because I read far more than I watched for huge sections of my actually up into my 20s, because even when I left Alaska and was living in Seattle, I didn't have a TV. I just lived in a little Spartan room and did my thing, and I did a lot of writing and reading. I had stacks of books all the time, and I would go and watch movies occasionally, but that wasn't until I was almost 30 that I got back into what would be the typical suburban or urban lifestyle like I have now. I watch movies all the time, and so I tend to compartmentalize my experience with art, with the various forms of art, and I actually have been actively, not always successfully, but I have actively resisted trying to write cinematically. And like I said, sometimes it doesn't work, just because I want to. I think that they're different. Obviously, they are different vehicles to execute your vision, but it goes deeper than that, because I find myself looking at something like Refn's Too Old to Die Young, and that series relies so much upon what's not being said, and it's very difficult to do that, to kind of write cinematically in that way, in a quiet way. And so I remind myself that instead of trying to emulate what I'm seeing on the screen and using that in fiction, is to take what I can, obviously be informed by everything that I experience, but for me, writing a story or writing a novel is separate from writing it as if I would be writing it for the screen. And there's a sort of subtle difference. And so when I'm relying, generally speaking, I try to rely upon artists that I've read more so, not exclusively, just more so than my filmic, the great directors that I love. They're more like the spice or the something that I try to inject into my writing rather than the foundational backbone of my writing.
John, do you mind if I say one more thing?
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
So, Laird, when you were talking, I was just thinking about that. A lot of the things that I pull in when I'm pulling things into my work from influences from the outside are unconscious. When it's conscious, a lot of times I'm just remembering a moment, an experience I had, and how it made me feel, and trying to figure out, is there a way on paper that I can make you reading something feel like I felt in that moment? And interestingly, sometimes those are things from books, but a lot of times they're more like, I was 7 years old when I saw Frankenstein for the first time, and when he throws the little girl in the lake, I cried. Because I was sad for her, but I was also really sad for him. That was big for me. And also, I think about a movie that should be terrible and unwatchable, which is one of the best atomic horror movies of all time, which is Them.
Yeah.
The opening scene in Them.
Yep.
It's a wordless opening scene with the little girl wandering through the desert holding her doll, and the look on her face, the haunted look on her face, and you know something awful has happened. The feeling that you get watching that little girl actually allows you to accept way more the ridiculousness of everything that follows, I think. And so, like, I think about those feelings that I get, and so sometimes consciously I'm like, okay, can I hit that? Can I ring that note enough to get the audience to sort of feel what I want them to feel, to go along with it? And so I wonder if, and I'm sorry, Ellen, and John.
No, please go ahead.
But I wonder if any of you guys sort of think about that stuff too, those emotional responses. But I don't want to have John not answer the question.
John, do you want to answer the question and then segue into his question?
Well, yeah, actually, it's kind of funny because, like, okay, so I was a total wimp when I was a kid. I was terrified of horror movies, and this was, for having discovered Stephen King when I was 14, and just being totally magnetized. Just being, this is what I'm going to do, and reading all of his stuff, and Peter Straub, and Clive Barker and such. And yeah, sometimes, occasionally it might have given me nightmares or whatever, but, I was fine with it largely. But when it came to film I had a really hard time with, because I think with a book, for some reason, I always felt I was in control of the reading process. But with a movie, you've got no control. And so once in a while, I would be like, when I was a teenager, I was like, well, I really should watch some of this stuff, it's my thing. And so I would watch something like An American Werewolf in London, and that was fine. But then I would watch Cronenberg's remake of The Fly, and that was not fine. And I had to, at the imaginary birth scene, I had to stop the movie. I was like, no, all right, just stop. And I went back in and I watched the rest of the movie. But it wasn't really until my wife and I got together, and she was like, you're a horror writer and you've never seen The Exorcist or The Shining. Shame on you. So yeah, we watched all those things. And, but it's still, I still, for as much as I try much more to keep up on things, I have to admit, even in films that are not always the best films, there can be those moments where I just feel like, oh, this is out of my control. This is not good. And it's funny because I was thinking to myself how Chris actually edited a book called Cut, which was this collection of all sorts of articles about all these crazy films. I remember Stephen Bissett had this insane article in it, and that actually like tipped me off to a bunch of movies. I was like, oh, I should probably, Cannibal Holocaust, you say, I should probably watch.
I haven't seen that.
I should probably have a look at this.
I've never watched it. It's not my area.
I've read enough about it that I don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
But, I think in terms of the influence thing, on the one hand, a filmmaker, God, well, yes, but a filmmaker like David Lynch or Carpenter or Cronenberg, say, just to name three, they've been really, really important to me. And the feeling for me that you get with a Lynch film, that those films unnerve me much more, I think, than most others that I watch. But, you know, as a writer, like when I remember having a lot of friends when I started writing saying, you know, I'm trying to like write a movie, you know, I'm trying to write like a movie. And I thought, but you know, I'm writing fiction. So like I want to do things that I can only do in fiction. And I used to, you know, then I was young and stupid. So I used to pride myself on thinking, they could never film this. You know, now I'm like, oh my God, what did you do? You're just flushing money down the toilet. But I absolutely respond to what you know, Chris's point about looking for those powerful emotional moments in film, and can you evoke that on the page? And you know, I suppose you can find those moments, you know, any place. I mean, yeah, I grew up reading a lot of comics as well, and some of the big emotional moments in my young life came from reading, you know. Alan Moore's run on the Swamp Thing, let's say, or Jamie Delano's run on Hellblazer, and it's like, can I get those feelings, you know, into my prose?
Go ahead, Raj. Sorry.
A couple things. I think being in a band, Chris, has like lent myself to doing like almost figuring out a way to do exactly what you're saying. Somebody might say that it's like an impressionistic painter or even Jackson Pollock, right? Where it's more about, for me, it's more about spirit than skill. It's more about atmosphere than, I don't even know, vocabulary, whatever. It's more about the feel of it all. And like you're saying, and the same way with the band. Was that a good take? Well, I mean, Derek sped up, but yeah, that was a good one. Did we capture the spirit? Yeah. Same exact thing with writing. And I always feel like I'm writing to like an imaginary or an invisible sort of shirtless drummer. He's got to be this gross dude like behind me, always just hammering away for like 25 years now. I've never looked back at him. I don't know what he even looks like. But there's always the sense of like, did we get it? Did we feel it? And sometimes you'll be all right, in the rewrite we'll figure that out. But I'm aware of that same thing you're talking about. I want us all to chime in on that idea, but I do want to say two things. First of all, Laird, I love what you said. I wrote it down. You've actively resisted writing cinematically, and I would like to try that myself for the next book I write, because I feel like there's almost a coming together of screenplay and novel right now, where there's a lot of horror novels that are present tense that can almost read like stage directions. I mean, Bird Box reads like that. Mallory stands in the kitchen. She exits the kitchen. The kids are down the hall. I mean, I'm like reading a script right now. And I see like there are many horror novels that have that. It's almost starting to feel there's the script and the novel is closer than it used to be. I'll hear what you guys say about that other stuff too.
Well, just very briefly, it's because Chris is touching on it, you're touching on it. That's, you know, maybe I'm not articulate enough. All I'm really saying is I do agree with. I watch film, especially great film, to get the idea, to get the influence, but I don't look to film, generally speaking, how to communicate that, because film communicates it in the way that it communicates it. A book or a story communicates it in the same emotion, but you use different technique. And so I try to figure out how to bring one into the other. Yes. And when I talk about not writing cinematically, I don't mean vividly. I mean more to your point. Harris when he wrote, I think it was, I want to say it was one of the Silence of the Lamb, you know, one of the Lecter novels. That was one of the big knocks on it. You know, 10:40 a.m., brick building, federal courthouse. Yeah. That's not, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, some people make lots of money and get critical kudos for that. That's what I am trying to avoid doing. And to your point, yeah, I see a lot of that. It's not my bag.
Yeah, Stephen?
Yeah, I remember in grad school, one of my professors told us that the project of fiction in the late 20th century has been to do things on the page that can only be done on the page. You know, the same way like Alan Moore in the comic book was doing things that really couldn't translate to the screen, you know? And I totally agree that that's a wonderful project. Also, I've gone the complete other direction, and I've got 3 novels, Demon Theory, Last Final Girl, and Zombie Bake Off, which hybridize screenplay format with the novel form, you know? And it's so fun to think like that, to have a novel be all exterior, no interior at all. That's really big task, or it's hard to do that, and it was really fulfilling to me to try. But you know what John was saying about being out of control, like watching something and feeling like I'm not in control of this, it's scary. I think the first time I felt that was probably before I was even watching horror movies. This was like 6th or 7th grade, when we were all passing around the Faces of Death copies, you know, and watching those and like watching them through our fingers like this. It was terrifying. And I felt like I was seeing stuff I shouldn't be seeing, but I was looking at the same time, you know.
Same.
This is very tangential, but I realized, first of all, I think I watched more horror movies when I was a kid than I do now. I mean, I watched everything. The first horror movie I ever saw was King Kong. And, well, part of it, I mean, I was like 7 years old or something, and I remember being sick, and I was watching it on $1 Million Movie, which had the movie on 7 days a week. And my mom wouldn't let me watch the end. When the fire engines came, she said it was over and turned it off. Because she said it would scare me too much, and I was a nervous child. And she wouldn't let me, so I didn't watch the final, you know, the whole movie for years until after that. But the other, okay, hold on, Jen. The other thing is I read visually. I mean, I don't know if everyone reads visually or not, but everything I read, if I can't see it while I'm reading it, it doesn't really work for me. It doesn't, any kind of fiction. But that's just, I don't know if it's just me or everybody. I'm sorry, John, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just going to say what's fascinating is I absolutely loved, you know, King Kong, Godzilla, all that kind of stuff. But for me, I used to differentiate. Those were monster movies, you know. So,
Right.
So like no, but it's interesting, right? That for me as a kid, those kinds of things, which in a sense are even more terrifying, you know, some huge creature that's crushing your city or whatever. But anything like that, you know, the sort of Harryhausen in the U.S. and Godzilla, you know, in Japan. And Gorgo in the UK. Gorgo's terrific. Those were things that I had no problem with. But bring it down to a human scale, you know, bring it down to Dracula or the Wolfman or something like that. And no way, that was way too frightening. And I don't know what that says about me, but you know.
Well, I found the crawling eye. I mean, I find scenes in movies really would get me. The crawling eye, remember? If anyone saw that, I don't even remember anything about it, but it was this crawling eye. And I remember someone was climbing a cliff and his head flies off. And that, I remember that. I remember nothing else about the movie. I think Forrest Tucker was in it. And that's all I remember. But that was terrifying. And then there's another one. I just realized, oh my God, I'll tell you in a minute, but there's a movie called Gog. And it was science fiction. And someone was trying to get out of a room, and it had one of these doors that closes, right? And it cut the guy in half, and it freaked me out. I realized mutilation really gets to me. I have a real hard time with mutilation in movies. Stephen, you're laughing.
Everybody's taking notes.
Yeah, no. I'm remembering a story I wrote for you, Ellen, where you asked me to pull back on some violence to a finger, and now I know why. You know?
Which story was it? I don't remember.
It was Alice, something, Alice. Alice.
Oh, right, the Alice story. Well, yeah, but also Alice wasn't meant to be a horror anthology, really. That's why yours was the most horrific story in there.
Before I forget, I just want to say, I don't know her personally, but I just blurbed an upcoming novel by, I don't know if it's pronounced Catriona or Katrina Ward.
Katrina, yeah.
The Last House on Needless.
Catriona. There's an O in there.
Catriona, yeah. I just don't know if it's pronounced Catriona.
Yeah, it's a Scottish name, and you pronounce it Katrina. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So her new novel is called The Last House on Needless Street, and I don't want to tell you anything about the plot of the novel, but I recommend you all read it because, and this is a challenge, I know, I think that this is unfilmable. It's a terrific book. I loved it. But I think it would be impossible to film without completely screwing it up.
Who's publishing it?
I'm not sure if it's got a U.S. publisher. In the UK, I'd have to look it up. But
I'd like to know more.
Yeah, I'm not sure she's got a U.S. publisher yet, but it's coming out in the UK, and it's so good. Anyway, I've never read anything like it. So how often do you get to say that?
It's a really good title. Really good title.
Great title, yeah.
Someone had brought up the question, if we were making an anthology of this, a film anthology of this anthology, who would you want to play? Who would you, well, I'm not sure the question, but if you would want to be in it, or who would you want to play you in it, or however you want to take that question, go for it. Stephen's laughing again. All right, Stephen, you answer first.
Who would I want to play? If we were making a movie of the making of this anthology, then I would hope to be played by Jeff Goldblum.
Okay. He might survive or not, depends on. Yeah, I have to say the remake of The Fly really got to me too. You know, and I've never been able to watch The Thing again, John Carpenter's The Thing again. I want to watch it really badly, and I've read a very in-depth article that made me want to rewatch it, but I don't know if I want to rewatch it alone. You know, I saw it when it came out, and really,
it's so amazing.
It's wonderful, but it's also pretty freaky.
Before
it's the body mutilation.
Yeah, but The Thing and Blade Runner came out the same year.
They did? Wow.
Yeah, that's hard to imagine. There was another one too. What else came out that same? Anyway, well, I'll jump in and say, considering you're talking about The Thing, I would be upping my game considerably, but at one point somebody posted an image of Kurt Russell in that Santa movie he made a couple of years ago, and Facebook identified it as me. So I would be more than happy to have Kurt Russell play me. He's older than I am, but I'm sure he can pull it off.
Okay. All right, Allison?
Tough one. I want to say Michelle Pfeiffer, just because, you know, maybe I'd get the chance to meet her and she seems awesome.
Yeah.
Like, for totally selfish reasons.
Right. That's okay. John?
Well, of course, I'd like to be played by Stephen Graham Jones. But if his agent says he's not available, when I was a kid, there was a brief period in my early 20s where I was young and thin, and people said to me, "Oh, you know, you look kind of like that guy, that James Spader guy." But since we're now kind of both, you know, older and kind of heavier, actually, it would probably still work, wouldn't it? So yeah, maybe it would be.
You
James
look
Spader.
much healthier than Spader.
Yeah, yeah. Only on the outside.
Laird?
I don't understand. I missed the question. Like what it.
Well, I'm not really clear about it either.
Who would play you, Laird? Who would you want to play you in your own biopic?
Really? That's the question?
That's the question.
Yeah, sure. That's the question.
I'm holding out for James Coburn, but who have you got?
Angel Eyes, old Van Cleef.
Lee Van Cleef.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That's awesome.
Josh?
I don't know. I feel like every Jewish dude in Hollywood, they're like too put together. I want a real neurotic guy, you know, a guy that's like pacing.
Woody Allen.
No.
No one's gonna like my part of the story then. Not for me. Yeah, like Ben Stiller, someone like that. There has been a short made of a Ben Evans film that Ellen saw. My friend James and his uncle Brett made the movie. And if any of you guys have seen The Greasy Strangler, have you guys seen that movie yet?
No.
It sounds like somebody's seen it. That movie
My cat's flying. You should have care that there's a door for it.
The star of that movie. You guys should see The Greasy Strangler. This is like lo-fi.
The Greasy Strangler?
Yeah, The Greasy Strangler. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't hold it against me. It's brilliant though. And the star of that stars as Ben Evans. And they wrote a feature script for it, Ellen. And me and my manager Ryan are shopping that with the short, hoping to make like a feature.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But
you know, there's also Josh. There's that guy who plays the lead in that Josh Malerman documentary. He'd be pretty good as you.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna play myself. Damn it.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say I can't imagine anybody playing you better than you could play yourself. So
yeah, no, I don't want like some like handsome Jewish dude that's way more. No. That's not gonna feel right at all.
This is completely out of.
Zachary Levi. There you go.
Who's it?
Shazam. Anyway.
Did anyone ever see Cutting Moments? by the guy who made, oh God, he made a trilogy of movies, real horror movies. Cutting Moments, I saw, and I don't remember his name, but he's pretty well known. I'm sure if I mentioned it, you'd know his name. But at an ICFA down in Florida, we had a film night, and one of the films was the first film, luckily. Maybe it was the second film after this one, because I had to go upstairs and go to the bathroom. I almost passed out watching the film. Anyway, it's about this family, this totally dysfunctional family, and it's a short film. These are all short films.
This is Douglas Buck.
Yes,
Ellen.
thank you, Douglas Buck, yeah. And this was the first one of the series. I saw the second one, Two Americans, something or other. But it's about this family and they're dysfunctional, and the mother is cutting herself, but it's great. Well, I don't know if I want to go into detail, but it's pretty horrific. and then you find out how badly dysfunctional it is. By the end, you realize what's actually going on. And I was watching with Susan Straub, and I remember I had to get up. I had to go into the bathroom. I turned green, apparently, and I almost passed out. I had cold water on my head, and blah, blah, blah. It was really shocking. It was really upsetting. And then I went back in after that and saw the movie by Peter Jackson called Finding Silver. No, Finding Silver. No, it was not a horror. This one wasn't a horror one. This was Forgotten Silver. It's an alternate universe about the origin of movies. Did anyone ever see that? It's a short film by Peter Jackson. Well, look it up. I mean, that Forgotten Silver, I mean, it's charming. It's really weird. You know, it's just about this guy, this guy who invented movie making before it actually ever happened. But Cutting Moments is a horror thing. You might want to see it, you might not. I think, Stephen, you'd love it.
Right.
So I don't know if it's online. I don't know if you can get it. But
I do miss the days of
it's pretty extreme.
horror and fantasy conventions where prior to streaming, you know, again, I didn't mention before, I worked in video stores all through high school and through college, right? So watched almost anything. But prior to streaming, I would be introduced to things by showing up at a convention, and Doug Winter or John Skip it would be 2 o'clock in the morning, and somebody would go, "Hey, I just got my hands on this thing. You have to see it." And then 12 people would be dragged up to somebody's hotel room, and you'd be watching something you never wanted to see.
I think Doug Winter might have brought these to the.
I am not surprised.
And it was not. It was in this. It was actually in an auditorium. It was part of the convention conference. I was like, oh my gosh.
I remember that from the last of the old Necronomicons in 2001, and the film room was showing all these Japanese films with no subtitles, but they were just like, oh, we finally got, you know, whatever, and people, oh, you know, and I was like, well, are there subtitles? And they were like, no, and I skipped them. And I feel a little guilty about that now. I wonder like what I might have seen. And obviously this sounds like a sort of a story prompt, but I like, there was that excitement though, that was really cool about just, we're going to see these images, even if we don't understand all of what's being said, we're still going to get to see this film production.
Well, I regret agreeing to go on several of those journeys.
The first time I ever saw Night of the Living Dead was in Germany, in a German theater. And it was in German. It did not have subtitles because it was in Germany. I was with a friend who spoke German. And I think I understood enough I understood everything except I didn't understand how they became zombies, which that was never really, I mean, it is explained kind of stupidly, but at the time it's like, how did they become zombies? I don't get it. But anyway, everything else worked well without dialogue, you know.
Arg.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, the first time I saw Night Watch, that horror movie, wasn't at the Dolby Theater.
Is that by a Russian guy?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I can't get it on Netflix. I want to see that. Sorry.
I saw it at the Dolby Theater down in Austin, which is a small place, and the screen was so small that when they projected it, the subtitles were on the curtain, so the subtitles were corrugated, and so we had to sit in the front row and try to like catch every fifth word, and it was still pretty good, you know.
Yeah, no, I really want to see that one, Night Watch and Day Watch, but I can't get it. I only have Netflix DVD. I don't have streaming, and I can't get it.
Well,
there's a third one.
A word of the witch.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, what?
I didn't understand a word of the witch, man.
Neither did I.
Theater, and I saw it with Allison, and at some point I'm like, are you?
Yeah.
I get
Was
it.
it English? I don't remember.
Get this. There's no way you freaking get this. But
I know. I could.
what's going on? You understood they got ostracized and something with the baby, and you understood all that.
Well, a lot of it you get. Some of it you get anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I first saw that at I was at a hotel, and a friend from Paramount had a early like unsound corrected version, and she let me watch it, and there was no subtitles, and I could never see the dude's lips move behind that big beard. So I'm like you, I had no idea what was going on, but it was still kind of fun.
Was it subtitled? I don't remember.
Well, I think you can turn subtitles on the DVD, I suspect, or on the streaming.
What were they speaking? I mean, I don't remember having a problem with it.
Old shit.
Oh, English.
Puritan English. Puritan English.
Yes,
Okay.
Puritan
Yeah.
Like really mumbly Puritan English.
I went with my one of my good friends who's 20 years younger than I am, but who hates horror movies, but I would drag her anyway. And my niece who loves horror movies, and the movie finished, and I think Jim Moore was with us too. The movie finished, and Jim and I were like, "Oh my God, that was so great! I loved it so much." And they both went, "We don't get it. We don't get it. We hated it." And I explained to them, I actually felt like it was because it's built on a sort of constant rise in tension that is, it starts really subtle, and it's a very slow creep up to the end, but it doesn't have the structure. There are no jump scares in the movie, so it doesn't have any of the structure of familiarity that comes along with so much horror.
That's
And
right.
I think that's why they hated it, because there were no moments where they knew they were supposed to be scared.
Well, in certain movies, you are anticipating, because you're anticipating the jump start, and you don't get it. You're totally tense the whole time, waiting for something horrible.
That and the Witch in the Lighthouse. My personal opinion is they're more art than product, and that's why you have the division. People who love it don't love it because it isn't how we're taught to watch movies.
Mm-hmm.
I loved The Witch, and at the end I watched The Lighthouse with about 8 buddies, like horror people, and the movie ended at the lighthouse, and I gave both fingers at the screen. I hated it. I actually yelled, "Fuck you," pardon me, Westport Library, at the screen because I was so angry with it.
This gives me the chance
Yes.
to relay the story of how
a brilliant
Paul
thing.
Tremblay and I went to see Midsommar. And Paul was really excited for this movie to come out. I mean, he was just, and I kind of, I had seen Hereditary, and I thought it kind of wobbled at the ending, but still I liked it.
I was just going to say something about Hereditary next.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
But more importantly, you had seen The Wicker Man. So this is already redundant. But yeah.
So Paul and I go. Paul's like, we're going to go see. I was up at. It was for ReaderCon. I was up for ReaderCon, and I went a day early, so Paul and I could do a thing at a bookstore in Boston somewhere. And so we went to this huge theater, and I should have known there was like I don't know, the water was out, right? So you had this massive theater complex, and there was no running water. And it was one of these deals. I've never been in a movie theater like this, not to sound like a complete yokel, but where it was about 4 levels going deep down into the earth. And every level had about 3 theaters and then massive concession stands. One level even had its own little restaurant. So there were really 2 choices for us. There was Crawl, the alligator epic, and there was Midsommar. And I was like, yeah, I guess we should go for Midsommar. And Paul was like, no, definitely Midsommar. And I was like, are you sure? Crawl? And he said, no. Elevated horror. He didn't say elevated horror, but he was thinking it. And so we went into to Midsommar, and we were like the only 2. There might have been another 2 people in the theater, which was surprisingly large and which had very comfortable chairs. And we're sitting in our very comfortable chairs, and I had gotten Swedish Fish. Because I thought it's Midsommar, right? Swedish Fish. And we watched this movie, and I'm like sort of sitting there thinking, I don't know that this is very good. Like it's beautiful to look at, but it just seems like kind of dumb. And then I noticed at a certain point that Paul starts looking at his watch, And I thought, well, that can't be a good sign. And so we get to the end of the movie, and Paul looks at me and he says, tell me you love that movie because I really want to argue with you. And I was like, no, I didn't think it was that good. And he's like, I'm so angry. I want to rage quit horror. And so then for the whole rest of the weekend, Paul was just like incensed about Midsommar. And every time, of course, and I didn't like it either, but it wasn't like a hill to die on for me. But for the rest of ReaderCon, every time I would see Paul, I'd be with a group of people, I'd be like, okay, there's Paul. Now everybody do this thing that they do, you know? And Paul would respond similarly to Chris with a certain digit being
yes,
right.
yeah.
But, you know, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, you know.
I hated the end of Hereditary, although I'm willing to not be sure about it.
Same.
I love the end of Hereditary. Go ahead, Josh, sorry.
No. I was gonna say, one thing I noticed about The Witch and Hereditary that I thought was really brilliant in terms of a horror writer was that their most clever trick was done right away. Like in The Witch, the peekaboo thing, and then the baby's gone, and you're like, oh, geez, if this is in the first 20 minutes, then what lies ahead? Nothing ever matched that in terms of like an idea or that freaky little tiny twisty scare. But because I saw it so early, I was on edge the rest of the time. And in Hereditary, that for me, that example would be when she turned the light off in the
grandmother is there.
Space and mom's standing on the shelves. Like, I was alone in that theater, and I got up to leave. And I was like, you know what? Hold on, dude. You write scary books. Sit down. Like, dude. You're
also, a grandmother could have been standing in the corner, right? So how would you? It's a dark theater, right? So you were putting yourself in jeopardy by getting up.
Yeah, but I, you know, it's funny. You always think, oh, I'm going to save that moment. I'm going to save that thing for later. But those two movies kind of show me like, no, go ahead, use it early. Show them what you can do, and then get them scared for the duration or something. Yeah.
And then let them down catastrophically.
And then,
yeah, that's the way to go.
60 times for the next.
Have you still not seen Crawl, John?
Wait. Allison wants to say something.
Let Allison. Yeah. I'm sorry to say I have not, but go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, both The Witch and Hereditary, I keep going back and forth on the ending of both, but I think I keep landing on the less is more. Like, I wanted both movies to end about 15 minutes before they did, because they had those, you know, the nice slow build, and then they built in all the doubt. And then at the end, they're just like, we're going to whack you over the head with, yes, this is supernatural. This is not just psychological horror. We're going to give you the answers that we were withholding for the rest of the movie, where you could have the doubt about maybe the girl and the witch is really just having a breakdown. Maybe it is all, you know, due to the fact that they're being ostracized, due to the fact that this family is really weird. And there's all this, you know, psychological stuff going on. Maybe there is no witch, and at the end you're like, nope, they're flying, it's fine, it's supernatural. It's like, oh, but you could just cut it off where she like lays her head down on the table like everything is terrible, the end.
And they have basically the same ending
with Hereditary, with like maybe this is just like a family that's completely losing it, and you know there's nothing supernatural going on, and then they remove all doubt at the end.
Yeah, you know, I think I would have tolerated The Witch better had it been called The Goat, and then at the end it was witches, and I was like, oh, I never guessed it was a witch. You know, I would have liked that a lot better.
That goat was amazing. That goat
was great. It was great.
You know, the most charming story about the goat is apparently when goats are happy, they wag their tails. And so they had to CGI the goat's tail because he was just so, he's like, he's a good actor. He was like, he's a good boy. Right, exactly. He was like, so that's like, that was apparently this, and I never knew that. So I just find it like, there's Black Phillip, but he's just a happy little goat. You know?
He's just excited to be there.
Exactly. You know?
I want to see the uncorrected version of that.
Exactly. They're like, no, Philip, stop wagging your tail. Oh, this is going to cost us a fortune in CGI.
Okay, wait a minute. That's uncorrected. How do I see the uncorrected version of Cats?
The butthole cut? I don't know.
I want to see that. I mean,
you just leave your TV blank.
I mean, I watched it. I finally watched it. I knew it was going to be terrible, but I can't believe how terrible it was. But I want to see the buttholes. Is there any way to see that?
You know, Ellen,
here's
what I would suggest. I think you should Google human cats with buttholes and see what comes up.
Yeah.
I think you'll have a whole new
Well, I
anthology planned out after that.
That's what, your computer just shuts itself down right after that. It's just like, no, sorry, we're not doing this.
Well, listen, I want to say something because
the end of the internet.
The phrase elevated horror has come up several times during this conversation, and it's such a Hollywood BS phrase. And I want to also say that to get back to this, John, you haven't seen Crawl. It disappoints me because we like a real sort of spectrum of horror in this house. My son Daniel cannot refuse any movie with a monster, no matter how bad it might be, and any movie with a giant animal of some kind that eats people. So Crawl, written by our friends the Rasmussen brothers, Michael and Sean Rasmussen, great guys. Crawl is actually eminently watchable and really entertaining. And I managed to get, my wife and I have been together, our first date was 33 years ago. So we've been together a long time. And when the movie Total Recall was in theaters, the movie ended. The original Arnold Schwarzenegger Total Recall the movie ended, and she looked at me as she stood up and said, "Don't ever take me to a movie like this again." And true to my word, I did not. I've never taken her to a horror movie or anything like that. I know what she doesn't want that tension. But for my birthday, I pleaded with her and persuaded her to go see Crawl with my daughter, my son, a bunch of us went. And my hand regretted it later because she mutilated my hand over the course of the movie because she was so terrified. But I was grateful to her for indulging me for my birthday. So I heartily recommend, if you haven't seen Crawl, it's not what we would call elevated horror, but that doesn't mean it's not great.
No, listen, elevated. I did an interview the other day where, I went to great pains to say that whether you call it elevated or literary horror, it's really important to recognize that these are marketing terms. Right. And they're targeting a certain kind of reader, and, fair enough. But I will see your Crawl, and I will raise you The Boar, which is on Shudder. See, Steven's nodding. He knows, right? Which is on Shudder, and is an Australian film about a giant feral pig.
Oh, which means it wins.
As big as like a rhino.
My son Daniel will be so excited.
Yeah, it's kind of just have a look.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's actually the opposite of elevated, whatever you would call it.
I think I like elevator horror, though. I like horror that happens in an elevator a whole lot. I've never seen an elevator horror movie that I didn't go for. But Crawl, that's been my comfort movie. I saw it 2 or 3 times in the theater, and then I went home and bought it as soon as I could. And I've been watching it every 3 weeks or so. It just does everything I want. It's got people getting bit by giant toothy things, and what more could I ask for?
Yep.
I will say, Chris, man, maybe it's because I'm in a band, but I do feel like this era does need a name, though. It's not elevated horror, it's not literary horror, but I feel like whoever came up with Splatterpunk, is that David Shaw did that or something?
Yeah.
Yes. And then I do think this era could use a name, though. I'm not saying to figure that out right now, but as a guy and a lifelong band member, I'd like if we were all called something.
Listen, I'm up for it. You're the band guy, so you can come up with the band.
I'm on it.
So you need someone in some snotty kid in a dismissive review in a zine somewhere or somewhere online who says these guys are just the whatevers, and then it becomes the adopted out of perverse pride.
It's kind of like the Led Zeppelin avenue of naming yourself.
Yeah,
possibly.
Hey, we can be Jason's children because we all kind of came up in the 80s. That'd be fun.
We certainly are.
Yeah.
Listen.
Okay, we're kind of out of town. Do you have any last comments about your stories or anything related to anything else? No?
Yeah. Ellen, thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. It's like, as I wrote online, it felt a little bit like being called up to the show or something. I felt like my short story. I've been pitching short stories in the minors, and then I got a letter from you. Hey, buddy, we need you. And I was like, oh my God, here we go. So thank you for having me. It's awesome to be a part of it.
Thank you all for being in the book.
Yeah, I've done a few stories for Ellen, and the few times that that's happened, I send it to her and I'm like, you can't possibly like this.
Yes.
But somehow she does, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome. Thank you for producing your stories, for writing them. And I guess we are done.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this panel, head over to our StoryFest 2020 playlist and check out the rest of our virtual author events. And for more information about StoryFest, visit the library's website at www.westportlibrary.org.